us able to attend, so Don's going to be running the meeting.
Okay, I was not entirely prepared for that, so just bear with me. And I might need a little guidance on how this kind of hearing goes.
All right, let's try opening the meeting.
We'll open the meeting, and let me just make sure everyone is here. Brooke Moore.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can. Matt Fee.
I'm here.
Okay, great. And we have Brian Riley from Town Council,
Yes.
Chief Pittman,
I'm here.
James Meerberg,
Good morning, I'm here.
and Eric Goddard is on.
He's
Yes,
a
ma'am, I'm
witness.
here.
And I've got somebody else in the waiting room, but it's not identified and I don't know who it is. And our
Okay,
kind of policy is not to let people in who aren't identifiable.
okay. Are we expecting anybody else?
I'm not
I'm
sure.
in.
Can we ask the individual to identify himself if he's monitoring this? It's a public hearing.
It's not a public hearing in terms of being advertised, so.
But it's a public meeting though.
I was told it would be public, open to everyone and be advertised. That's what I was told by Mr. Riley. That anyone who wanted to zoom in could zoom into the meeting. This is what we're asking for.
Okay, but our unwritten policy is when we have Zoom meetings, people need to identify themselves. Who is on the iPad, please?
Okay, good morning. My name is Sion Johnson. I'm the wife of Christopher Johnson.
It's my client's wife.
Okay, I'm sorry.
fine.
What is the first name?
Ceon, Sion.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So just as a matter of procedure, I was told this would be open to the public and advertised. Please note my objection that this is a Zoom meeting, but it's not open to the public apparently, unless you know about it.
It-
It's not a public
it-
meeting.
It's open to the public, just like every select board meeting is.
It
It's
was
posted.
posted on the website for the open meeting law.
So the notice of this meeting and this hearing was posted on the website?
It just wasn't advertised as a public hearing in the newspaper.
Okay, all right, thank you for the clarification.
Brian, do you want to guide me on how I go, who I go to first?
Sure. So, you know, the bylaw itself, a little sparse, but in my opinion, the board is familiar with when you hear an appeal from the Historic District Commission. And so in that case, someone's applied to the HDC to do something, they get denied, they appeal to the board. And so in that case, I believe typically you would hear from I don't think it really matters who goes first, but you would hear from the HDC as to why they denied this application. You hear from the property owner as to why they think they're entitled to do whatever they want to do. And then in that case, we know the standard because the court has issued something on it, is the board considers the reason for the denial and determines whether they think there was reasonable grounds for it or was it arbitrary and capricious. So in my opinion, that's sort of the legal standard, and that's the way I would go, whether you want to hear from the chief first or from Attorney Meerberg and Mr. Johnson. Like, as I say, I don't think that really matters. Just we'll let everybody have their chance to say what they want to say.
Okay. So, Mr. Meerberg, would you like to start?
Before,
Happy to,
John,
but-
hang on, sorry, before we go, and so the standard, the standard is similar to arbitrary and capricious, like in the HDC, exactly, right? Now, what
Yes.
happens if we, if we deny it, what recourse does the applicant have past us?
In that case, at least my opinion is that there is a statute that provides what's called a certiorari appeal, where there isn't any other obvious appeal presented. And in that case, it goes to, you would have to file in a, you would have to file in the Superior Court and be arguing to the court that this board, didn't have good grounds, essentially. It would be sort of a record review. It wouldn't have witnesses and that sort of thing, but it would be an appeal to the Superior Court. That's the way I
Right.
see it.
Right, thank you.
Brooke?
Could we ask everyone who's not muted to mute, please? Eric, and there's another iPad that's unidentified.
Yeah, can we ask whoever is on the iPad 603-320-7914 to identify themselves, please? It seems they don't have audio. Anyway,
Okay.
I would just say go ahead.
Yes. So I think Attorney Murberg, if you want to,
I think
Again?
I'd like to suggest that we have the chief begin, seeing all we received is one line, your approval is denied based on unsuitability. We don't have any indication as to basis. So I'd like to hear from the chief first, and I'm happy to make all of my arguments and present my exhibits, but I think we need to understand this one line based on unsuitability doesn't give us any guidance. Period.
I think that's fine, Madam Chair, if you want to hear from the chief first.
Okay. Chief Pittman?
Okay, good morning. What occurred here was there was an application for a taxi cab operator's license that was filed by Christopher Johnson. And the normal procedure for that is people come into the police station that are looking for operator's licenses, and they appear down at the front window, and the clerk down there processes their application, and then in most cases issues a license after they do the process. And the statute or the regulation, the bylaw lays out, I believe it's a regulation, under taxi cabs, charter, limousine, and tour vehicles, chapter 367, lays out the conditions in which a license can be issued. And there's a lot of different conditions. But when you get to section D, it provides for rejection of the application, revocation of license, in addition to failure to meet the requirements of the preceding subsections, in other words, qualify. A decision to reject an application or to suspend, revoke, or fail to renew a license may be based on the following. And then it goes through a series of convictions for felonies or misdemeanors. There's certain times that you're barred from getting a license. In my opinion, and after reviewing this, none of those exceptions applied. There was no evidence that there was any conviction. But under section D3, it said, notwithstanding the preceding subsections, where the evidence shows the applicant's or licensee's other activities or condition would, if combined with the use of a taxi cab license, present a danger to the health, safety, welfare, or morals of the town, the select board or its designee may reject an application or suspend, revoke, or decline to renew an existing taxi cab operator's license. That's where I started to have some concern. Now, first of all, it's very rare that these applications come to my desk. Most of them are just processed and a license is issued. It's only when there's some mitigating circumstance involved in the background, for instance, prior contact with the department, criminal record, et cetera, that it gets reviewed by a command officer who then makes a decision as whether it should or shouldn't be approved. And in this particular case, it came to my office along with copies of the police reports that involved a dangerous drug arrest that Mr. Johnson was arrested for, a case from back in 2016. And in particular, that case, what was disturbing to me about it was that on two different occasions, on March 17th of 2016 and on April 1st of 2016, Mr. Byers or Mr. Johnson is accused of participating in a drug sale in which he was the supplier to the drug dealer, in which the purchase was witnessed by the Cape Cod Drug Task Force, which included members from the state police, the Barnstable Police Department, and the Nantucket Police Department. They witnessed two hand-to-hand buys, and then the person who sold the drugs was not Mr. Johnson directly to the undercover officer. Mr. Johnson was the supplier. Now, Mr. Johnson was driving a cab for Bev's Taxi when he supplied the drugs to the supplier. And this was all witnessed by the police officers, the detectives, on two different occasions. Mr. Johnson was subsequently arrested and charged on May 3rd, for distribution of Class B substance and for conspiracy to violate the drug laws. And so the police reports that are part of the record contain in detail the observations and the on the buys that were conducted by Trooper John Hannafin from the state police, working with the Cape Cod Drug Task Force, and witnessed by detectives Michael Cook and Detective Brett Morneau from the Nantucket Police Department. And there, in particular, it's difficult for Mr. Johnson to claim that he didn't know that drugs were being delivered if he was a courier, because what he delivered was 4 cut baggy corners with a white powdery substance to Mr. Byers, and Mr. Byers then delivered one of those bags to the undercover agency or officer just a few moments later, after Mr. Byers received them from Mr. Johnson while inside the cab. So it's my opinion, after reviewing this, that Mr. Johnson would be a danger to the health, safety, and welfare and morals of the town if he was allowed to continue to drive a cab based on his our prior observations of his activities while he's driving a cab.
Madam Chairman, am I permitted to ask several questions of Chief Pittman?
Yes, I think that's
Good
fine.
morning, good morning, Chief. I note you gave a recitation of what you claim the officers observed. What you didn't tell the select board is that my client had a trial in front of 12 Nantucket jurors and was found not guilty of all charges. Am I correct?
I wouldn't know that. It's not in my records.
You don't know that this so-called prosecution ended in my client being found not guilty of all charges after a jury trial with 12 Nantucket jurors? You don't know this as Chief of Police?
I do not know that. I don't know the specifics of why. There's a lot of reasons why people are found not guilty.
For the record, Madam Chairperson, excuse me, we have filed as an exhibit a certified copy of the Nantucket Superior Court docket, which reflects at the very last page, after a full jury trial, all charges, he was found not guilty. I can give you the correct exact date of the verdict. On September 26, 2018, jury, after deliberating, found him not guilty of all charges. One of the exhibits that I've offered in evidence prior to this hearing today, it's one of the exhibits that's been previously filed. Are you aware of the fact that Mr. Johnson, Chief, after his arrest, the court ordered the immediate return of his driver's license at his arraignment on May 17th of 2016?
I'm not aware of that.
You don't follow any of the criminal cases that are prosecuted by your office?
Well, I do, but there's an awful lot of them. So
Okay. One of the documents, the second document I've submitted, part of the record, is the defendant's motion for return of his taxi operator's license, which was granted by Judge Barrett on May 17th, 2016. It's one of the second exhibit. Your investigation, Chief, are you aware of the fact that Mr. Johnson has had and continues to have a valid Massachusetts driver's license?
I believe the application submitted indicated he had a valid driver's license, correct?
Are you also aware that in the relevant time period for the past, I'll use the rough number, 18 years, Mr. Johnson has had a taxi driver's license?
Including during the time he's observed by my officers delivering drugs to a dealer?
That's your assertion. You weren't present, correct?
Well, it's my police officers observed and documented in their reports.
Apparently, it was rejected by a jury of 12 individuals from Nantucket. Am I correct?
Well, as I say, there's a lot of reasons juries find people not guilty, and I don't know that that's one of the reasons.
So would it be fair to say, Chief, that for the past 18 years, there have been no motor vehicle violations associated with Mr. Johnson based on your background investigation?
I don't have that information right in front of me.
Do you have any reason to believe that it's inaccurate?
I don't know.
Can we agree that he has never been charged with violating 367 as it relates to the conduct of a taxi driver?
That you cut out, Jim.
Can we agree that chapter 367 provides that if an operator does certain things, he can be either suspended or lose his license? For example, keeping his cab in the appropriate condition, operating his cab a certain way. Can we agree that those regulations apply?
Oh, I mean, all I could agree to is that I'm not aware of any violations.
So for
Other
the
than
past
the ones that are
18 years, there have been no 367 violations based on cab operation. Am I correct?
not that I'm aware of.
No. There is what's known as the Town of Nantucket License Wait List, which is published each year on the website.
Correct,
And that's something the police department does, is it not?
correct.
Now, directing your attention to June 22. Did you receive a request from Mr. Johnson to inquire as to why his name was passed over on the license taxi list?
I don't recall that, actually. I vaguely remember that, but I don't recall the details of it. That request would have went down to the records section, to the permit window.
Refresh your recollection. Come to the police station after learning that an individual by the name of Marco Navarro, who was number 23 on the list, had been issued a taxi license, contacted my client and said, "You're number 14, but for some reason you got passed over." Do you recall that?
I don't.
Can we agree that for some reason, Mr. Johnson was never notified that he was passed over on the list he'd been on for 18 years until he learned from Mr. Navarro that he was, 10 people past him had been given a license?
I wouldn't be able to agree to it because I don't know that occurred.
What prompted you to write the letter? Which is part of the
Hey, Merberg, can I just interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
Every time you move
I'm so sorry.
side
My
of the
apologies.
screen, we can't hear you, okay?
Please, if you don't hear me, please ask me again. I'm sorry. I'm holding in my hand part of the official record, which is the June 28th, 2022 letter that you had prepared to Mr. Johnson. Are you familiar with that?
I remember signing a letter, yes.
Okay. And this was because Mr. Johnson had come in and attempted to find out, number one, why he didn't get a license, and number two, why he wasn't notified that he was passed over on the list.
Okay, I don't know anything about being passed over on a list, but
Well, your department prepares the list, correct?
correct.
And I believe it's in the record, the June updated list of August 17th, 2021 updated list had Mr. Johnson at number 14 and Mr. Navarro at number 23. And Mr. Navarro got a license and Mr. Johnson didn't, correct?
I don't know that.
And, well, I asked the select board to take notice of the fact that they publish a list each year listing where you are on the list because it takes a number of years to, if you will, bubble to the top. And in this case, Mr. Johnson at number 14 did not get a license, yet number 23, Mr. Navarro, got a license the same year. Which means there were 10 people after my client who got licenses or had the right to get a license. My client didn't. Now, with regard to your information from the police department, can we agree the records reflect that my client had a taxi operator's license for 18 consecutive years?
If you say so. I don't know how long he's had one. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just saying,
Understood.
I only know this one narrow little part of this whole process because this is the one and only time this was ever brought to my attention with Mr. Johnson's name.
Yeah,
And that was
I
only
appreciate
to decide whether or not his activities fall under this D3 in my opinion. And my opinion was that it did. That's it. I wouldn't have known Mr. Johnson if he walked in the door until I saw him sitting there next to you. Or even heard his name before until I looked at the police reports.
And you would agree that under section 367 3D, it says one of the bases for revocation or refusal or rejection is if you have a felony or a misdemeanor, correct?
That's correct.
And he doesn't have either, does he?
He doesn't have a conviction. That's correct.
For either a felony or a misdemeanor of any form.
To my recollection, he doesn't know.
And Attorney Riley and I had previously agreed, I have no problem with you discussing his Corey, which is adult criminal history, and he has no convictions on that, does he?
I don't have the Corey report in front of me. If you want to put it up on the screen, we can read it. I can pursue it and peruse it.
Unfortunately, I don't have his Corey in front of me, but would something you'd be accessing, of course, right?
That they would have accessed that when they made the decision to bring it to my attention. Yeah. And then they pointed out on that an arrest for because our records would show an arrest, not just convictions, an arrest for this. And then I reviewed that case to find out what the circumstances were. And like I said, based on the fact that, my officers observed him operating a cab, distributing drugs, that is what I considered, even though a jury would find him not guilty of that, I can't disregard what my officers saw with their eyes and wrote on a police report.
But you do feel it's warranted to disregard a jury of 12 of his peers deciding he was not
Well,
guilty?
I recall a murder case here recently in which there was almost a mistrial because the juror fell asleep. Had nothing to do with the facts of the case. There's a lot of reasons why somebody's found not guilty. It could be the witness didn't testify honestly. It could be the individual involved. It could be a lot of different reasons. We see it with.
You don't know the reason in this case,
I
do
don't
you?
know the reason because I wasn't even aware of it.
You weren't aware your office? Okay. Let me ask you this. At the present time, Chief, you'll agree with me, would you not, that Mr. Johnson has all the rights and privileges to operate a taxi. The only thing he doesn't have is ownership of a taxi license, correct?
Well, now, see, when I was asked to review this, what I was asked to review was his operator's permit application. I have no idea that he even applied to own a license.
I understand that. That's not my question. You would agree with me that Mr. Johnson is currently a taxi cab driver on Nantucket and has been for some period of time.
I don't believe he should be because I think his license he doesn't have a license.
What license is it you think he doesn't have?
I don't believe he has a taxi operator's license.
I think the record will reflect that we had filed a copy of his driver's license and his taxi license.
But that has to be renewed every so often, and this process was the renewal of it, to my understanding.
You think you were asked to review whether he had a taxi driver's license
That's
or a
correct.
taxi operator's license?
Taxi operator's license, which is the taxi driver's license. He's not this isn't an application for a taxi owner's license that I was looking at or was asked to review.
Certainly is. exactly what it is and let the
There's
select board.
a misunderstanding between the permit office and me.
Mr. Johnson is, well, so you think you were trying to determine whether he should be driving a cab or owning a cab? Which do you think it was?
Driving a cab.
And you understand that he applied to own a cab, do you not now?
I
that
do
you're in
not,
this area?
I don't recall that, so.
I'm assuming the select board has a copy of his original application to become an owner, not a driver, an owner. All right, I have no further questions, the chief, this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the board have questions?
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Brooke or Matt? Brooke?
Yeah, I'm unclear as to what we're deciding at this point, because when I read through the packet, it seemed to me that it was an operator's, like a driving license for a taxi cab driver, not an owner's license. But maybe I misread this. The distinction between them obviously is clear to me in my head, but I thought that's what we were referring to
Owner's
today.
licenses-
So,
Brooke, owner's licenses are issued by the town clerk's office, I believe. So this is, the police department deals with operator's licenses, which are the driver's license.
This, just so the select board is clear, if I may, this was an application by my client to have a owner's taxi license, which is why we're referring to the town of Nantucket wait list, which is the wait list for the right to own a taxi license, not to be an operator. My client has a taxi operator's license, a taxi driver's license. This was his 18-year wait to get to own a taxi, not just to drive a taxi. He's been driving a taxi. The record will reflect for the past 18 years uninterrupted, which is one of the reasons the court gave him his license back so he could earn a living during the pendency of his criminal case. So we're here certainly defer to Mr. Riley as well. We're here referring to the issue of whether or not my client, who's been driving for 18 years, has no moving violations, no criminal convictions, was passed over improperly when he applied for a full license to be a licensed owner at a time when he'd been driving for all these 18 years with no violations, no motor vehicle violations, no taxi code violations, and being found not guilty by a jury of the charge, which is the basis for the chief's decision to refuse his license. So,
Matt,
I'm sorry.
Matt Fee has a question.
Yeah, that's a quick. All right, so just so I'm clear, where does an owner's license, where does that application go and how is it processed? Who looks at it? And where does the taxi driver's license go? And who do they apply to?
Town clerk issues the owner's license, but did the police review it?
We'd have to ask Miss Baxter that. I'm not sure what, that's under her office. I don't, like I said, the only time I've ever seen these are for operators licenses.
Okay.
And then the other question would be to the chief, if you thought this was a operator's license, not an owner, and he's applied over the last 16 years and received it, and he didn't this time, what would be different this time? Was the process stricter or tighter, or what's the?
There's been no change here that I'm aware of. The only thing that would have happened, the only thing that was different this time was that his record was brought to my attention when they were reviewing the application, and they asked me to make a decision on that. And that's what I did. So I'm not aware of any change in anything. And this happened, I think when did this application come through? It was back in June or something. We still had the same personnel in place at that time that had been in place for a number of years. So I'm not aware of anything changing.
Have we heard from the town clerk's office on this? There's nobody here from there, right? So Brian,
Sorry, there is not. I didn't realize that they should be here.
okay, no, I'm just trying to understand this whole course of events. Brooke? Sorry, my dog.
When did Mr. Johnson learn that he'd been passed over for a, so I think I need to get the language straight. We're talking about a license to drive a taxi, which was denied by the police department. And then we're talking about an actual, like what they would call in a city, a taxi medallion,
Well,
to own a
if-
taxi medallion. And I think, may I finish? I think we're talking about two different things, and I want to be clear that we're not talking about two different things. So when did Mr. Johnson learn that he was passed over for the what I would refer to as the taxi medallion, or the taxi owner's license?
I'm happy to answer it if you'd
Yes,
like.
go ahead.
Thank you. And I apologize for interrupting you. My client has, right till today, a valid taxi driver's license that has never been suspended or changed or modified for the past 18 years. What he learned was in May of 2022, he learned by speaking with a gentleman by the name of Marco Navarro, who was number 23 on the list, that he had received his license to operate a medallion, what we call a medallion. And at that point, he went back and looked, and of course understood he was number 14 on the list, yet a license had been issued to someone who had come up to that point of number 23. That's when, in May, my client went to ask to speak with Chief Pittman as to why he didn't get his medallion. And then in June 28th, although the chief did not speak to him directly, or refused to speak to him directly, he got a June 28th letter telling him he was denied a medallion license for unsuitability, because at no time has he not been driving a cab from the very beginning 18 years ago. We have a list of all the people he worked for up to and including the present date. So his driver's license as a taxi driver is not an issue. This is an appeal of the denial of his right to have a medallion after waiting essentially 18 years to come to the top of what would have been the list, and only learning that 10 people past him had been given a license. That's what alerted him to the fact that he was passed over. He was never even notified by the police department that he had been passed over until he made the inquiry.
John, can I follow up?
Yep.
Through you to Mr. Riley, the section of the regulations that the chief refers to in his letter, are they referencing the license to drive a taxi or the license to own a taxi? What does that section of the code refer to?
I mean, it appears to refer to both.
Okay.
And because, under the regulation, someone has to apply to get either one of these licenses, and they can be denied. And if they're denied, they get an appeal. I will add that it's been my impression since we've, started needing this hearing, that Mr. Johnson has had an operator's license or a driver's license. We certainly know that he had it in 2016 because the police reports refer to him driving a cab. And then there's something Attorney Merberg submitted yesterday. In the context of that criminal trial, they moved to have his taxi operator's license restored, and the court allowed that while it was pending. So it's been my impression that what the board is talking about now is whether or not he should be issued a taxi license, taxi medallion versus just the driver's license.
Question on that. Do we have the ability to kind of order one to be issued if there aren't any available because they've already been given out? Because we have a cap. And if he was passed over, that's an error. But what's the process to rectify that if there's none currently available?
Well, I guess I'm just playing it through here. if this board finds that there weren't good grounds to deny the application for a taxi license, owner's license, you know, I think I don't have a great answer off the top of my head, because,
Yeah, like, does he go to the top of the list, or can we override the cap? I just want to know what our options are.
right.
I don't
Chief?
have an answer.
Chief,
Yeah, under section 2, 367-2, which is the section on taxi cab licenses, which are the owner's licenses. Basically, the select board will periodically determine the total number available. So I suppose you could make a determination that one more could be available. In addition to that, under section, these applications for ownership are actually filed with the town manager's office, and the town manager actually makes the decision as to whether or not somebody's going to get an owner's license. It's the town clerk that actually issues the license. So, you know, I said the only thing that comes to the police department is the operator's license. And then at some point back when Ann McAndrew was running this, when she came over to the police department, the maintenance of the list came over with her. So that's how we got onto that. But an application should be filed with the town manager for a license, and then the town manager makes a decision as to whether it's granted or not under the criteria under section 2, which is a lot different than the criteria under section 3.
So did Libby deny the license?
Can I speak something here? We
Yes.
haven't gotten any, I mean, multiple licenses got issued this year is my understanding, and not one came to our office.
Right.
Yeah,
My
It seems like
understanding.
our
went through them.
process needs a little clarification.
For the record, my client did pay the registration fee each year to renew his right to stay on the list and pay the appropriate fee as required. So, as I say, his notice of this was only after he learned somebody far down on the list had gotten the license he's friendly with. That's the only reason he found out.
Okay. Brooke Moore?
Through you to Chief Pittman. Chief, the letter you wrote when you wrote it, in your mind, you were writing in reference to an owner's license or a driver's license for a taxi?
driver's license.
Okay. And so for me to make a decision on this, I really need to understand the process by which Mr. Johnson was passed over for the medallion and the reasoning behind that, because I feel like we're talking about two different things here that may be unrelated, and it's really confusing to me, and I would like to know more about that. And I think that, you know, as Don said, we need to be clearer. So the waiting list for medallions sits with the police department now?
That's been, yes, when Ann McAndrew used to run it, she worked for the select board in Libby's office. When she came to the police department and started working for us and the licensing department was created, we maintain the list, but we don't issue the licenses for taxi owners. Okay, those by the regulation are issued by the town manager. Town manager makes the decision on whether or not a person is qualified or not. And like I said, the criteria a lot different than it is for an operator's license. I don't think there's any of this language about prior convictions and everything else like I used.
Brooke?
So at this point, we have no idea who made the decision to issue the gentleman who got the license over Mr. Johnson. And
That's what it seems like.
I would like to know that and understand what criteria, what reasoning was used to make that decision, because then that's what we would know whether we're overturning. It feels almost like Chief Pittman's letter is irrelevant to that decision at this point, so it doesn't feel connected.
Yeah, I mean,
Unless we determine that the person who made the decision on the medallion had that information, but we're not clear on that at this point.
Ms. Moore, I think we could solve the problem by having the chief explain, when they get these applications which are filed at the police department, that they send them over to be approved at the office where Miss Mooney is. So I think if the chief can explain, they have the list, they go through the list, they make the approvals or decide, goes and gets maybe executed by the clerk's office, but the decision is made at the police department.
Well, the decision's made by the town manager on the licenses. We don't, we just provide them. It's like a liquor license. We gather all the information, we put the record together, we'll attach the, if there's a query thing, we'll attach it and we send it over there. It's their decision to make. It's not ours. If somebody here is making that decision, they've been making it outside of what they're supposed to be doing. So like I said, our decision is solely about operator's license, the driver's license.
okay.
It
Well,
seems-
I have
seems
kind of
like-
two things. Oh, sorry.
Please go ahead. I'm sorry.
One, I would like to know who did this denial. Yes, I think that we need to be much clearer on this process. If it's not just going to be a straight follow the list, or what the criteria would be specifically for denial should probably be in writing and the person should be notified. That being said, in this particular case, it doesn't make a huge, if the concern is, say, a public safety thing because someone has had an arrest. One, he's been found not guilty, and we have to accept that regardless of what circumstances were behind that court decision, because that's our that's part of our judicial process. We can't make assumptions. And two, public safety wise, whether he's driving a cab that somebody else owns or he's driving a cab that he owns, there's no difference to me. So, I mean, I think ultimately we need to dig into this process and get a lot of clarity, but that he should be issued a medallion.
It's our position.
I don't think the process was, I don't think the denial is founded.
Just respectfully to the select board, our position is it's fundamentally unfair because he has everything associated with operating a taxi cab, has the same privileges he's had for the last 18 years. He has a current taxi operator's license. All he doesn't have is, based on this denial, the right to have ownership of we'll call it a medallion for clarity for our purposes. The right to own a cab. Otherwise, he has to pay each time he makes a fare to the owner of the cab a portion, which is what he's been trying for 18 years to end up owning rather than working for someone else and sharing the fares.
Correct. And I mean, I'm essentially saying that my opinion is in agreement with you, if that didn't come across.
Great
But
minds think alike.
what's the pleasure of the rest of the board? And are we at that point where we can make a decision, but also ask for some clarification on who's reviewing this and ultimately deciding?
Yeah, I'll speak. I came in, this usual, it's usually hard to overturn this type of thing. I came in, believing that I would uphold the recommendation, but I think that I'm having similar problems to you, Don, with upholding it. I think because of a lot of the unclarity, and I think, and I don't see the difference between, owning it. I understand being an owner is a good thing. I would hope that Mr. Johnson is, going to be a good citizen if licensed this, and we will not, find any issues later. I would hope that that's the case. And, and so I would make a motion that we, what's the word? That we go against the recommendations of, and that was to make a motion that we support Mr. Johnson and provide him a license.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second for discussion.
Okay. Go ahead, Brooke.
Mr. Riley, were you going to say something? You unmuted. I was going to ask you about process, and I also don't know what our process is for increasing the number of licenses, whether we have to have a public hearing for that before we can actually do it if we want to go that direction.
I think we do.
Chief, you were reading from the regulation about the cap and the waiting list. Does that mention a public hearing? It would take a vote of this board to make a change to the cap, but it sounded to me as though you certainly have that discretion.
It just says, they may periodically determine the total number for issuance.
Okay, so again,
I
to
think
me,
Erica has-
sorry.
Sorry, Brian.
What if you decide to issue the owner's license? What if you allow that, but then when the new renewals come up next year, maybe bring it back down to 60? So somebody might, we'd be at 61 now, but then next year, say 3 names come up, only 2 people get their licenses to
Yeah.
bring it back to 60.
I'd be comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Is that allowable, Brian?
Well, I guess for the same reason, the board has the discretion to set these numbers.
If all 61 renew, we won't take anyone's away, but if someone's not renewing, we just drop that extra, right?
I see. So just for example, if Mr. Johnson was applying to renew, he sort of wouldn't have to prove himself over again, assuming there's nothing else in the interim, but it would make conceivably one less available to the people down the list.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking of it like we are over our like package store liquor licenses right now.
Right.
So if somebody surrenders one, it goes
Right.
away, but
So yeah, I think that
renew it.
I don't offhand, I don't have a problem with that process. But again, based on the language of the regulation, I think the select board has the authority and the discretion to create a 61st one, right now, if that's what you want to do.
So Matt and Brooke, would you want to add that language to the license, to the motion in regard
So-
to issuing the 61st, but as soon as someone drops, the list goes back to 60?
So I would prefer, Don, to do it as 2 separate motions. One
Okay.
to overturn whatever happened. I mean, I'm not even sure how to word that motion because I'm not sure what was rejected. That's unclear to me. So I just want to make sure we get that correct if we are going to overturn the denial. And then do a separate motion to add another license and issue it to Mr. Johnson if we
Okay.
agree to that.
Matt, can you restate how you phrased your motion?
Oh, I phrased it very poorly, Don. If I
Oh,
remember.
maybe Erica can help us out here.
Matt moved to support Mr. Johnson and issue him an owner's license.
Okay, so we did it as a combined. That's fine.
So we
And
can
then
make
we
a follow-up motion clarifying how the 60 versus 61 works going forward. Okay.
We have
and I-
precedent on adding licenses, because when we wanted handicap accessible vans, we bumped the number.
Okay.
And that was what, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, we bumped the number for those. So,
Okay.
and I don't know that we bumped it back. I think we made those extra, but anyway.
Okay, shall I take a vote by roll call? Matt Fee,
Aye.
Brooke Moore,
Aye.
Don Holgate, aye. And do we have a follow-up motion?
So I would move that the select board expands the number of taxi licenses to 61, subject to a return to 60 on surrender of one existing license
I think
sometime in the future.
that sounds good. Is there a second?
Second,
Brian, are you okay with that?
Yes, the only thing I was going to add was, again, based on the language in the regulation, I would say you do not need a public hearing with newspaper advertisement and all that sort of thing. I think you have the authority to do that here.
Thank you. Okay, all those in favor by roll call, Matt Fee,
aye.
Brooke Moore,
Aye.
John Holgate, aye. Those motions pass. Is there any follow-up or are we good?
Well, just the other reasoning, I find it somewhat arbitrary that we're denying a license now that has been approved for, 16 years. That was the other part of this, whole thing, that I thought was, I find that difficult to understand. So that was where my reason was coming from.
Okay. I think that we do need to get a little clarification on this process and who is officially in charge of passing over a license and have some criteria. So maybe we can get some follow-up on that at one of our next board meetings.
Right.
But otherwise, I'll take a motion to adjourn, I think, at this point.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
Thank you for your help, members of the
Thanks.
select.
Thanks,
board.
Jim.
Thank you as well.
Matt Fee on the
Aye.
motion to adjourn. Brooke Moore.
Aye.
John Holgate, aye. Thanks, everyone. See you later.
Good day.
Okay.